In the last discussion, we ended with kind of a very blitzkrieg-like overview of the playbook, the process for career transition. Today, what I thought we would do is just rehash those 15 quickly, and then we'll highlight the ones that we're going to dive into today, and we'll get more specific about those. So these three, as I recall, the suggestion was that we move health and wellness up to number one because it really belongs there. It's either the most important, or certainly from a chronological standpoint, when you're in career transition mode, it becomes the first critical step to get the house in order. And then the next step is dealing with a financial burden. So you don't really know how long you're going to be in career transition mode. So how long do you plan for, and what do you do differently? We'll dive into the personal brand. Then the basics, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and getting out and going to conferences and networking. So the ones that are highlighted are the ones that we're going to dive into. And then you've got kind of the management of the process. So you've got to create your own lists and target them, narrow them down, develop essentially your own internal CRM system for organizational purposes. You don't have to, but if you're like me, you're like, oh, what did I say last time? And who was it that I reached out to? And then we're going to talk about an investment thesis or theme, and some messaging and outreach. And then lastly, this final set, alternative roles that you may never have considered. I don't think that's high. It should have been highlighted because I think we're going to dive into that one. Interviewing, negotiating, and then lastly, landing your first 100 days. So the ones that are highlighted plus alternative roles are what we're discussing today, but I'll just take this opportunity to pause again and see if anybody has any questions about the other areas. Is there anything you'd like me to, any questions that you'd like me to address? Okay, well, I don't see anything. And by the way, I'm not seeing everyone's face. So if you have a question and I'm not acknowledging you, then by all means, just speak up or let Joyce know. So your personal brand, arguably the most important step in a private equity search. Hey, Chris, I see your hand up. Sorry about that.
Yes, no, correct. I was a little late putting my hand up, but I think one of the challenges that I certainly have, and perhaps other people on the call, very often when you see private equity roles advertised, there's a requirement to have private equity background. If you don't have that, it's almost like you're a non-starter. So but perhaps at some stage you might be able to give us some thoughts and insights as to how to overcome that challenge.
Yeah, I'll address that head on right now. We might as well. I like making this interactive, so jump in at any point with any questions. So a couple hours ago, I had a conversation with an executive recruiter that I think they said they closed 500 searches last year, and 400 of them were private equity related. So that's, to me, they must be a big shot. It sounds like they're one of the leaders in executive search. So I sort of asked the question of them. I said, I think the process works like this. A private equity group tells you the specifications for the hire, and you go out and you search for that candidate. And rather than starting with something that's critically important to them, which I think is prior private equity backed experience, you start with something that's easy, like industry or role, and then you just hope that at the bottom of the funnel, the bottom of the process, the 2 or 3 candidates that remain are actually private equity backed, and usually they're not. So then what do you do? And they chuckled and they said, in almost every case, one of the most important criteria is, yes, prior private equity experience. So to answer your question, you're right to be cautious or to be concerned. It's most relevant in finance, unfortunately for you. So CFOs who have no prior private equity experience have an incredibly difficult time landing a role in private equity as a CFO. So what do? Well, you start as, head of something, FP&A or whatever. It's very difficult to get an assignment as a CFO. You usually start at a lower level, somewhere else in finance. Now, for what it's worth, I'm not sure it's relevant to you, but CMOs, even COOs, it's less of a hurdle. Private equity views you as their eyes and ears and their colleague, their partner inside the company, and they really want someone that speaks their language and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's tough. Anyone want to share a personal story or weigh in on that or disagree?
Talk about the portfolio companies. Is that an easier way to get the PE experience to then work your way into the actual, PE operator?
Yeah, so what I was referring to is a CFO role inside a portfolio company. So you basically have two options. Well, let's say three options. You can be a CFO of a portfolio company, which is what I'm typically talking about when I say the word operator. When I say private equity professional, I'm referring to the professionals who are in the private equity fund as sort of fund administrators, fund managers. They're on the boards. Now those individuals play a variety of roles. They can be deal team members and board members. They can be business development or origination people, which is really not your area of expertise, or they can be back office support, administrative, et cetera. In addition, there's a relatively new role that might be, well, it certainly is relevant to you, and it's a good way to answer this question. There are wise old sages who have one of three areas of expertise. Role specific. In other words, I've been a CFO 7 times in my career. I am a CFO's CFO. That's my expertise. Or you are industry expert. So I've spent my entire career in healthcare. You're a healthcare industry expert. Or maybe situational meaning turnarounds, multinational acquisitions, public to private, something like that. So you could potentially find yourself in a operating partner role more easily than in a CFO of a portfolio company role, particularly if you have a lot of experience in a role, in an industry, in a situation, one of those three. And the larger the company, the more valid your experience becomes.
Yeah.
Any other questions or any other discussion on that topic?
So just to clarify, so in the PE operator, it's if you find yourself in that role, many of those organizations tend to be acquired, right, by PE firms, and that's kind of your segue in. So, and we're seeing a lot of that, right, trending wise in the industry. And so it was pretty vertical.
Yeah, the average hold period, this may be surprising to you. Does anyone want to guess? What is the average hold period for a private equity group holding one particular portfolio company?
5 to 7 years.
It's less than that.
I was thinking 18 months, but it's just a hunch. Because 1 year is too short.
Yeah.
I'm saying 3 to 5.
Yeah, 3 to 5 is the textbook answer. It obviously varies. So what often happens is a private equity group makes an acquisition. Before making that acquisition, they already have a CEO and usually a CFO in mind who are going to take on the assignment on day one. In other words, they're going to land on day one and be ready to run, not crawl or walk. And when the CEO lands, what happens? Normally, the CEO looks around, maybe it takes 2 months, but ultimately says, I don't really like the COO, or the CMO is great, the CTO is great, but everybody else at the C level is going to be removed. I'm going to get my people I know and trust in. So the average tenure of a private equity backed executive historically is only about 36 months, but recently, as Lynn alluded to, that number has crept up. So now we're at about 51 months on average, for what that's worth. So short period of time to create value, and then you're in career transition mode all over again, which is why we're all here to learn about the process.
Kit, this is Mike from North Carolina. If I can just go back to your discussion about how to get in, or you have to have PE experience. I thought I had a very refreshing meeting with a PE fund earlier this week. In fact, missed one of your other meetings for it. And I met with the person who coaches the CFOs. He's a partner in the fund, but he doesn't necessarily focus on one individual or a handful of portfolio companies. He focuses in particular on the CFOs. And he was very refreshing. He's like, the standard has been, we have to know the person, or the person has to be extremely deep in an industry. But he said, at our fund, we're changing that. He says, we believe, after having several experiences, that we're really looking for people who have handled challenges well and who have a diverse background and seem to be very good learners. They have to be CFO oriented, right? They're not going to take a marketing person and put them in the CFO chair, expect them to do M&A. But he said, we're looking more now for athletes rather than position. And he said, if you have a good track record and you haven't been in a PE fund, or you're not super deep in an industry, if we like you and we think you have a good track record of success in your history, he says, we can coach you with what we need. Now, this is a rather large PE fund, although they're focused on the lower and middle market. They don't do, $300, $400, $500 million type of companies. They do smaller stuff under 200 million. But I thought that was just kind of refreshing, because I had not heard that before, and it was nice to meet with someone in an actual fund who said they're more and more looking at that kind of background versus what we were talking about. So.
Yeah.
That's
and
fantastic.
If I could jump in for a second on that, you will often, I have been a PE firm professional as a deal partner and as a CFO for 15 years, as well as overseeing PE portfolio company CFOs.
Awesome.
You will get a very different answer if you manage to talk to someone at the firm versus the recruiter. The recruiter is going to read from a script, and that's the end of that. They haven't been CFOs. They've never been PE professionals. They're reading from a script. So I would strongly suggest that if you're looking at a specific role, do some research on the private equity firm's value creation strategy and tailor your pitch to that. So if you have a great track record of turning around money-losing companies, go for a restructuring firm. You've been a PE, if you've taken a company public, that's equivalent experience, and really lean into what your value creation strategy as a CFO has been and your track record versus PE firms, because they're so different in what they do.
Yeah. Well, I could imagine, excuse me, the recruiters, they're trying to fill the role and get their commission, and they want to fill it right. So maybe I agree. They probably do have more of a script. That probably makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, that's really it. Was that Heather speaking?
It was.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for jumping in. I appreciate it. And Mike, I'll not only do I agree with what Heather said, but there is an important clue that you shared, and that is lower middle market. So you're much more likely to land a CFO role in a lower middle market private equity fund than one that's investing at the upper end of the middle market. So lower middle market, generally speaking, and there's exceptions, could be defined as private equity funds that invest in companies, platform companies, original companies that have EBITDA of 2 to 20 million or thereabouts, roughly speaking. So if you're looking at an opportunity with a private equity fund that invests in $50 million EBITDA businesses, just kind of clue yourself in that it'll probably be even harder to land a CFO role there without prior private equity experience than it would be in a fund that invests in smaller companies. Does that all make sense?
No, absolutely. So how does that impact your branding? So having all of this in your arsenal and like having this great information, like how should your
question.
personal brand be positioning? Is it, if you don't come from PE, that's going to be a little differently because you're going to take a different approach. And if you are out of PE, maybe your branding is a little different.
So first of all, what is a personal brand? Does anybody want to jump in with either an example or a definition? How many of you have a personal brand, would you say? One or two? Okay, so remember we said the mental health, wellness, fitness is most important, or at least chronologically it comes first. Well, the personal brand may not be the first step, but it's potentially the most important step, because everything else, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, the way you interact, what you say to somebody in person about yourself, it all ties back to this concept of a personal brand. And a personal brand is your value proposition as an individual. So when you interview for a job, you are trying to be their solution. You are the solution to a problem that they have inside their company. Either someone is not working out, or there's an opening and they have to fill that opening, and they're looking for somebody who has obviously a particular set of skills, knowledge, experience. So how do you work? How do you deliver, or what do you deliver? What's your commitment? Where do you focus? What kinds of situations do you focus on? If you said, I've had a lot of success in turnaround situations, okay, that's important. Now, do you want to hang your brand on that because that sort of pigeonholes you? Or do you like that kind of environment, or do you dislike that kind of environment? So only you can answer these sorts of questions. So it's all about making yourself best applied to the situation where you're most likely to succeed, and also where you're most likely to have fun and enjoy yourself in a very stressful environment, right? So you are limiting yourself, right? Because if you think about it as an upside down pyramid, what you're doing is you're basically saying, I like to work in this situation to solve this kind of problem because I'm a superstar in this regard, and I've had these kinds of successes. And with every step in that process, you're winnowing down opportunities. You're saying, I don't want to do this, I can't do that. But that's helpful for not only for the hiring decision maker, but also for yourself, because you're more likely to be successful and have fun. So what you're trying to do is position yourself to solve a specific problem, and then make sure that your messaging ties into that. Now, it doesn't have to be laser specific so that you've eliminated 99% of all finance jobs, but you want to make it clear what your value proposition is. Any questions on personal brand and why it's so important? Anybody want to push back?
No, Kit. So essentially it's kind of finding your golden thread, right? What you've done in all your roles, and is there a common theme? And that's basically what your strength is to position, right? So this is who you are.
It certainly does hinge on past experiences and past successes. So somebody, I don't know, I may be making this up, but somebody said, and some people really like the term superhero status. Some people say that's really corny. I don't like it. It's not for me at all. But somebody said their superhero status is that they're able to vault from one type of personality to another type of personality in a senior executive capacity and connect the dots between two very disparate personalities. Now, I don't know, that may not resonate with you guys, but it's sort of thinking outside the box to realize this is something that I can provide tangible experience statements about, with metrics and measurements of success, and that are relevant to a hiring decision maker, right?
So do you have any examples that you're able to share of LinkedIn profiles or CVs that really hit the mark on that? Because I personally think I'm awful at
that. Not today, but we will be having a session on the LinkedIn profiles. So we'll be diving into how to craft the four lines that appear at the top of your LinkedIn profile are what's most important. And your personal brand usually ends up in there in one way, shape, or form. So it's a good question, but not today. But I think that's part of the process, is to look at LinkedIn profiles that are amazing in that regard, and look at a few that are not so good. And just to give you guys a sense of what's happening, we're most likely going to be doing workshops in the off weeks. So we might do a discussion like this where it's more one-sided, it's more presenting to the masses. And then in the next session, we'll do a workshop in which we do breakout rooms, so that if we were doing the session on LinkedIn profiles, for example, you'd get broken out into a group of roughly 3 people. You'd look at each other's LinkedIn profiles for a few minutes. You'd offer some feedback, and then we'd come together as a group and discuss it. And then we'd do another breakout. But those workshops can be really, really helpful for you, because it's not just a lecture. It's more like, okay, my peers are weighing in. Which leads to another question. Do you all know one another? Do you have any context of each other? No? I'm seeing shakes.
No.
Not hearing anything. What's that, Dave?
I said, no, I don't know anybody else here in this group.
Okay.
No, me
So-
neither, but I really do appreciate Heather's comment. I feel the same way on the LinkedIn. I know it's super important, but I don't know that it really reflects my brand. So I look forward to that workshop.
Awesome. Let's do this for now. In the chat, why don't you just go ahead, especially since this is being recorded and you'll probably get a recording or a link to the recording. In the chat, put in your LinkedIn profile and or your email address so that each of you can make, connections for one another, be a resource for one another. We're all in this together. So if you're willing, go ahead and put your LinkedIn profiles in there, and you guys could reach out to one another and kind of share wisdom and insights. From time to time, you may learn of a lead outside of FANG, a job lead outside of FANG that you say, man, that's a really cool job. That is awesome, but I'm not a fit. And if you learn of something like that, you might as well send it out to a peer here in this group and say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in this opportunity. Instead of, I think this is a great one, but I'm just not qualified. So, networking. How many of you are familiar with ACG, the Association for Corporate Growth? I see nods and hands. Okay, good. So let's just go through this. So networking with private equity hiring decision makers is challenging. I don't know of anyone who would say, oh, sure, it's easy. They're very accessible and they're very friendly. Just reach out. It is challenging, but it does not have to be. So I've got some suggestions. So in terms of whom to reach out to, if you're looking at a website of a private equity group, remember you got operating partners, you got business development or originations people, you've got the back office support kinds of people, and then you've got the deal team members. So of those 4, the deal team members are the most relevant and most important to you. However, operating partners can forge the gap for you, so you can make friends with operating partners and they can facilitate introductions. So that's number 1. Operating partners generally have less stressful lives and are more available and are more senior, and perhaps you may be better able to forge a connection with an operating partner. Particularly one that, like, let's say hypothetically their focus in life is helping CFOs in portfolio companies. Okay, that's relevant for you and relevant for them. The originations and business development people might be relevant for you if you have what's called an investment thesis or theme, and we'll get to that in a minute. But if you have an idea of an acquisition target or a theme or an investment idea, they might be your best friend and they might be able to help you. But it's really going to be the partner level individuals who are on the deal team, on the board, that are the most relevant for you. You ultimately want to get to that point. You may have to network your way in. You may have to find referrals and introductions. So how do you conduct your research or your outreach rather? A warm introduction usually needs to happen. And so you're going to ask for a referral. I may have comment on that in a later slide. Sorry about that. But in order to get to an in-person network, such as at a ACG event or something of that nature, you have to make yourself relevant. So if you're going to an ACG event, and I said this last time, so I apologize to those of you whom I'm repeating myself. At an ACG event, a major event, there's the national event, just now called Deal Max, I think, which I would suggest is not worth the money for your purposes, at least. There are chapters in the major cities around the country that have an annual event as well as regular routine monthly events. So if I were you, I would look for the annual event of a chapter that is near you that is in the following list. Okay. Atlanta, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, Houston and Dallas, Los Angeles, and I might be missing another one. So those are the big events. And again, each of those chapters that I just rattled off have large one-time annual events that are not the national ACG event, but they're big events. And they also have regular routine monthly events. If you can get yourself to the big event for one of those cities, or it's worth whatever amount of money you pay to get in, generally in the $500 price point, roughly. Also, the private equity individuals who are in most of these events, you have roughly 50 or 100 private equity firms represented standing behind a table, and they are there for two reasons. Well, really for one reason. They're really there to meet investment banks or business brokers or intermediaries that have deals. However, the second most important reason that they could be there is to meet you. And I mean that sincerely. So if they have the opportunity to network with an operator, they're excited about that meeting. It's a very good use of their time. It's a very efficient use of their time to meet you. But you can do a few things to help yourself out. One is to plan ahead and think about who are the private equity groups that are going to be there in that particular city. Maybe look at the list that it's on the website and reach out to them in advance and tell them you're going to be there and you'd love to schedule some time to carve out a half-an-hour meeting. Two, if you know the meeting hypothetically is in Boston, you could just reach out to firms that are in Boston, whether they're at the ACG event or not, because you could go to their make a visit at their office, and there's a chance that they'll take you up on that offer and get to know you. It does depend on sort of what you're bringing to the table and what their needs are, and of course their degree of busyness at that time. At the event, at an ACG event, for example, your goal is simply to get that business card. You've captured the business card. Now you've got to follow up. Now the process really begins. And when you start your outreach, you can say, hey, we met at the ACG event. We had a conversation about my experience as an operator, so on and so forth. So another option is industry specific meetings. So I don't know, hypothetically, your experience has been in consumer packaged goods or in healthcare or whatever, and there's a healthcare event in Washington, D.C. In September, and you go. So while you're there, look up private equity groups that are in the Washington, D.C. area that have a focus or have some companies in their portfolio that are healthcare specific, and see if you can carve out some time to meet them at the event. Suggest that they go to the event. Or you could say, hey, I could carve out some time to visit with you at your office. So it's a good way to start the process, because really what you're doing is you're now differentiating yourself from just names on a piece of paper or resumes that landed in their lap or LinkedIn profiles they're viewing on a computer monitor. You're a human being that they have a relationship with. They've met you, they've judged you, they've assessed you. Are you legit? Are you real? Do you have anything interesting to say? Any value to add? So those are the kinds of decisions that they're making in real time. And you're just one step further along towards getting a job offer than all those other people that they're just looking at on a computer screen or piece of paper. Before we get into targeting, any questions so far?
So Kit, just a quick question. You would caution making sure you have your personal brand in place before attending any of these events because you only get one shot at a first impression, right?
Right. I would agree with that.
And then on the investment thesis, what I've heard from a lot of people who have like engaged in private equity interviews, there's often kind of like a test where you either have to put together some type of pitch book or deal or something for them to assess in the way you're thinking, right? And what your skill set is and your strength. What suggestions would you give individuals on this call in that area?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Lynn. I'm not sure I'm as qualified perhaps as some of the others that are in this conversation to weigh in on that. Has anyone had much experience in creating those in sort of assessment stages? So a lot of what I hear, Lynn, is you are being asked to provide pro bono, using your own blood, sweat, tears, time, and experience and expertise, something of value and substance to a private equity group that they might use in real life to make an investment decision. And so a lot of the operators that I've spoken to have said, it's a real sort of dilemma, like how much time and energy and effort do I put into this and it's a gamble, it's a risk. And so I think the simple, the best way to think about this is if you say no, you've sort of carved yourself out. If you play along all the way through till infinity and you're still one of three vying for a role after they make the acquisition, then maybe you're doing yourself a disservice. So my suggestion is that at some point you have to say, look, candidly, I'm willing to keep going as long as it takes to get myself an opportunity with you. I am committed, I am vetted, I'm vested, I'm interested in this particular company, and I'm interested in your private equity fund. But if I'm one of three at this stage, it's not fair. So how many are left and where do I stand? That sort of awkward conversation probably has to happen at some point. Did that make sense?
Yep.
If I could jump in on that for a second. There's no getting around this, unfortunately. All PE firms ask for it, but I would say that for a CFO, and I apologize for the background noise here, for a CFO, it's less risky than if you're, for example, a CMO, where there's, not to disparage what we do for a living, but if you're CFO, it's all about execution. So the plan is largely similar across postings, right? You've got to evaluate the systems, the people, the processes. You've got to evaluate the expenses, blah, blah, blah. It's how you present it that's going to make the difference, because frankly, the degrees of freedom for a CFO are far less than they would be for like a CMO or a COO. So you're taking less risk. I would develop kind of a boilerplate and just have it on hand and adapt it for the situation.
That's great advice. Elsa?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is my first session. I'm loving the conversations, very engaging. Thank you so much, Kit. Very prepared. I am from an investment banking background, and so I've gone through some of these processes as the intermediary for buy sides and sell sides. I'm actually surprised to hear, and I'll be a first time CFO, so I don't have the candidate experience per se, but the fact that they're asking for some prepared work doesn't surprise me. I think that for any other job, like outside of the PE firms, is becoming an increasingly becoming a trend that you need to do a presentation of some sorts, right? An hour long. And I did one for a Series B startup for a VP of finance role, reporting to the CFO, right? I'm not even the CFO itself, but I was asked to do a 60-minute presentation in front of a panel of my direct reports, my peers, and my supervisors, right? So that ask is becoming increasingly common, and I've heard that from another recruiter that I trust, and she would advise candidates to spend 8 to 12 hours on it And it's important to have that in mind because that's what your competition is doing. And that's why you should ask for additional time if they ask for, when would you like to schedule, right? So that's comment number one. Comment number two was going to be, I echo what Heather says for the CFO role. I think is a little bit more, there's more of a playbook, right? There's EBITDA numbers are nice and clear. And also when we run sell sides, it's so common now that there's a quality of earnings studies that's already been commissioned, usually from the sell side. It facilitates a process. It already analyzes the historicals, and probably the PE investors are so used to and familiar with deploying financial due diligence and really having a playbook for, hey, we need to get to this EBITDA margin, or we need to get to this kind of gross margin, and these are the different levers, right? That's what the whole investment professional team is doing as they refine the thesis and drive it through the investment committee. Sometimes the CFO has folks underneath this, said differently. Sometimes the head of corporate development is reporting to the CFO. That's why having an industry point of view, it's helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah, and actually you mentioned something that is key to getting your presentation right. Ask, if you're one of the final three candidates, it is absolutely acceptable to ask the Q of E, because then you know what marks you need to hit.
Excellent.
That's great. Thank you. That's great information. Appreciate that.
All right. So when we're creating this upside down pyramid and we're narrowing the field, right, with our own personal brand, it translates into which private equity groups are relevant for me. So you're also doing the same thing externally. Internally, you're saying, I'm only interested in the following kinds of situations because that's where I have experience, skill, success, and these are the kinds of situations that I'm excited about and that I have fun doing. Externally, you're saying, well, what type of private equity group do I really want to be involved in? What are the needs that they might have that I'd be interested in fulfilling, and so on and so forth. So you're going to need to create your own list. There are lots of different resources. Private Equity Info, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a really, really good second place to PitchBook. So PitchBook is kind of the gold standard for all data related to private equity groups and professionals and portfolio companies and operators and so on and so forth. They've got amazing data. And if you have $30,000 lying around to spend on a one-year subscription, it makes a lot of sense. But if you don't, Private Equity Info is awesome. And the head guy there is Andy Jones. Andy is a really good guy. And if you reached out to Andy at Private Equity Info and said, I'm only interested in the following kinds of situations, sizes, industries, whatever, you could get a custom, list at a reasonable price point. So that's really good advice from me to you based on my own prior experience. So you're going to target, as I said, by industry, comma, by size, by their differentiators, by situations. So just to pick on turnaround situations, if you're the sort of person who says, I thrive in chaos and crisis, and I love turnarounds, okay, awesome. Then there are a lot of private equity groups that would not be interesting to you because you're never going to see a crisis or a turnaround. They're going to sell that company off. So which are the ones that thrive in that kind of turnaround environment? Those are the ones that you want to be targeting. As an example. Stage of fund, Heather, and then if there's anybody else who's a private equity professional, I'd love your take on this. But if you can choose to join a private equity environment where they're early in the fund life cycle, that's preferable to a situation where they are late in the fund life cycle. Heather, anything to add to that, or does anybody else have any perspectives on that?
Whoa, that's a tough one. The reason it's a tough one is you have to look at where the founders of the firm came from. So there's no private equity firm is sui generis. They're all spinouts from some larger, more mature complex. And every founder, unfortunately, in many cases, takes that culture and that pattern recognition with them and puts it to work. So you've got to do some sleuthing around with other CFOs who have worked with either the parent or those professionals elsewhere and get an idea of what, how they're able to put their money where their mouth is. It is unfortunate but true that a lot of private equity firms have completely unrealistic expectations for the finance groups of the private equity firms, and the turnover can be incredibly high. So you got to look out for that, and you have to look out for whether or not they develop a relationship with their portfolio company CFO that can survive an investment. Because a private equity firm with a nuanced grasp of what the levers of value with the PE firms will be will move their CFOs to other portfolio companies if something doesn't work out because the market moves against that firm, or they've got a really good grasp on the value of a finance team, and the first thing they do is look for somebody that's going to build a team and implement process from the beginning, and then let that person run with it. But you definitely have to network around and ask the right questions. So that's a really long-winded way of saying it may or may not be relevant.
Yeah, I love it. I love everything that she just said. And if you look at the bottom bullet that I popped up as she was talking, call it whatever you want. You're basically going to be doing your own qualitative assessment of a private equity fund by asking around, as she said. Those people who say every private equity group is the same, they're not telling you the truth. It is difficult for private equity groups to differentiate, but you have a vast spectrum on the good guy measure or good person measure. And you definitely have quite a few at one end and a few at the other end. So my point there is, so there are some private equity groups for which money is the only measure of success, and it's the only cash, or what's the right word I'm trying to say? It's all that matters. And there are others that recognize reputation, ethics, morals, doing the right thing for other people, and they recognize the value of human capital. So we could go on and on this, but you don't want to get yourself into an environment with a private equity group where you're miserable, because they really don't care about management. And usually the term that's thrown around that's generally speaking disparaging is the word management, and the term that's generally thrown around that's a little bit more respectful is operators. So there's quite a few private equity groups over the years that I've heard say things like, well, what do we care? If management just doesn't work out, if they can't perform, we're going to fire them and bring somebody else in who can. And there's a fewer number of private equity groups who would say, well, we invest in people, they know their business better than we do. And we're sort of riding our horse, and they're going to figure it out. And we're in this together, that sort of thing. So it's only you can decide which private equity group is the right fit for you. Any questions on that?
Yeah, the other thing I would jump in and say there is, doing post-merger integration work can be a lot of fun and exciting. But again, ask for the Q of E, because you may find yourself in a position where you have to let 50% of the company's global workforce go, and that can be grueling. It can be brutal, and that's not for everyone. And unfortunately, if there's one thing that PE firms really, really, really underinvest in across the board, it's human resources. They have zero respect for human resources, zero respect for human capital management, with very, very few exceptions. So there will be no real professional support for that, and largely it falls to the CFO, and that sucks.
Slowly it's changing, but I again agree with what she said. So executive recruit.
Any suggestions for me, how to position myself? So my area of expertise is in driving growth for the companies, portfolio turnaround, through strategic pricing, revenue growth management, and I do a lot of customer segmentation analytics. So identifying opportunities and kind of capitalizing on them. So I've done like 3 IPOs, helped some of the private equity companies, turning them around and then going public. So my job kind of is temporary. I guess my role in portfolio companies, I work there for 6 months, about a year, and then I move on to the next challenge. So it's different from becoming a CFO, for a longer term kind of role. Um, any suggestion could be more of a consulting, and how do I approach? How can I position myself and approach them?
Yeah, so Irshad, I'm just going to jump ahead to a slide that's relevant for you. So there are, if you are coming from an environment that is a very, very large environment in terms of EBITDA level, or from a type of company that is very large or very, very sophisticated, and you are open to working, as it sounds like you are, in
Yeah.
fractional or interim or expert or consultant type roles. The
Sure.
good news is private equity is rapidly becoming much, much more open and amenable to these kinds of situations. So you could be relevant, not just as a full-time W-2 CFO, but as an interim or fractional CFO or anything on this laundry list here. And then from a scenario standpoint, there are a lot of different situations, and this is by no means all inclusive. There are a lot of different scenarios or situations where you can work as a consultant or an expert or, a fractional executive and so forth. Any questions on that?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
And one of the things that I would suggest is, I'll put in a little commercial. Let's see if it might be the next slide. Yeah. So we do have 9 minutes remaining, and so we're going to go backwards a little bit, but I run this community called the Operators. Remain involved in FANG. FANG has lots of value. Don't stop participating in FANG, but I wanted you to be aware that the operators.pe has an online community platform. So feel free to email me, kit@theoperators.pe, and I can explain how you can look for opportunities like that, like those that I described back here, if that helps you, Irshad.
Wow. Thank you so much.
You bet. And Elsa, was there a question that you had at the same time?
Oh, I wanted to just to clarify. I heard you, my takeaway was the connotation of the words management vis-a-vis operator. So when the investors talk about the leadership team as management, is actually there's an implicit negative connotation. Is that your message there, Kit?
That's what I said, Elsa, but that I'm overstating, I'm overgeneralizing it. By and large, management and words like operators are used interchangeably. My point was really to say there are some private equity groups that would say something disparaging like, well, if they can't perform, we're just going to fire management and we're going to bring in management that can make it happen. And they just sort of view you as just this, fungible transactional commodity, as opposed to somebody that they've invested in, which is the way other private equity groups think of it. It's not as simple as just saying, well, those who use the word management are one type and those who use the word operators are another type. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
Got it. Because some firms do have training, right? For like a Vista Equity, right? They have trained, they get all the CFOs across the partners together, right? And everybody learn from peers and learn about best practices.
Yeah, Vista is one of the best in that regard, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but word to the uninformed with Vista, they will make you take an incredibly insulting IQ test, but they make everybody do it. So suggest doing some research on what the test entails, and there are practice tests you can take online. That's a must. That's a must.
Jake, what was the site again? You said operator.pe?
Yes, so it's the THE operators with an S.pe. And my email is kit@theoperators.pe.
Okay.
So there's a community that I run that has career support as well as peer advisory councils for solving value creation or strategic growth dilemmas inside portfolio companies,
Awesome.
and other stuff as well. So,
Got it. Thank you.
yeah. Let's go back because we skipped over something important here. So let's go to an investment thesis or theme. So if you're going to an event like an ACG event, or if you're sending an email to a private equity group, or if you're placing a call into someone, and you can drop in to the subject line or in your voicemail, or if you're standing up at a table at a Capital Connection at an ACG event, if you can plug in the phrase, I have an investment thesis, suddenly, the seas will part, the doors will open, whatever expression you want to use. So it's a humongous benefit to you to have an investment thesis or theme. And we're going to get into the definitions. You simply have to ask yourself, am I an operator? And I'm just an operator. And that's what maybe not just, but what I love to do is to be a CFO. If that's the case, well, maybe this is not for you. But if you've ever worn sort of an entrepreneur's hat and you kind of think, oh, I like to have creative ideas, then maybe this will be appealing. It will absolutely differentiate you, but it's not for everybody. So
Kit,
yes,
based on that, it's very interesting. So that almost sounds like you're moving from an operator mode into potentially raising capital. Is that correct?
It could mean that, but that's not what I literally intended in the context here. So what we're trying to do here is to help you land your next or your first private equity backed role. So you go to Vista Equity Partners or whichever, XYZ, ABC Capital Partners, and you say, you have a fund, you're looking to do deals, I've got an idea. Let me share my idea with you. It's that simple. And so you're more likely to be hired as a CFO or any C-level executive if you bring something to the table as an idea. So it's an idea, it takes place in a specific industry, you've narrowed that down, you've observed something, there's a change, there's a development, there's a trend, there's a migration, there's an influx of technology impacting or customer need that's changing, or something's happening in that industry and no one has taken advantage of it yet. So that's basically a theme, right? I want to take advantage of aging baby boomers, health, wellness, and fitness issues. Okay, well, that's not that brilliant or well thought out, but that's a theme. More specific than that is a thesis. A thesis is when you take all that and you say, there is an opportunity here and it can be solved by taking a company like A and a company like B and a company like C and adding technology and adding speed and doing this and that and creating a value proposition. And you'll have something that's going to be an industry killer. And I know just the 3 companies that should be the first 3 to be acquired. And I actually know the CEO of one of them. And, he's 66 years old. I think we should talk to him. So that is a thesis, and that is something that a private equity group would say, let's talk. As long as you've done your diligence, your homework, and you realize from a size, from an industry, from a situational standpoint, it's a fit, yeah, it's relevant. And that can really open doors for you, for sure.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, we've only got about a minute left. So rather than trying to tackle something else, let's just take a pause. So if anybody has any questions that you want to fire off to me in the interim before our next meeting, feel free to email me, kit@theoperators.be. I suggest that you guys get to know one another. So we'll work on that in our next session. We'll do some introductions of one another for one another, and we'll do our workshop next time. And I'm excited to introduce a co-presenter. I still need to discuss that with Lynn and Joyce. And if you guys have any suggestions, requests, pushback, hey, I didn't really like what Kit said about this. I disagreed completely. Hey, bring it all up. This is all collaborative, so feel free to weigh in. And we're out of time. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Yes, and I just want to say,
Thank you.
Please save the chat, everybody. You know, the three dots up at the top of the chat box, just hit the save button, and Kit, I put your email there and your LinkedIn and your website. So if you need to reach out to Kit,
It's 1:30.
just go ahead. And
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Kit. Great presentation. Incredibly on point. So we're looking forward to the next workshop because I think that's even to be just continue to increase the value proposition. I think it'll be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks, kid.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
Take care.